Oh, hello there. You just waking up? Welcome to Campaign Comrades, the Socialist Gamer podcast. I'm your host, Ben, and with me, as always, are my trusty co hosts. Go ahead and introduce yourself, guys.
I'm Mike.
I'm Matt.
And your boy Rick.
We are here today doing a bit of a different type of episode than is going to be our main focus going forward. We're doing a little bit more kind of deep dive, little kind of retrospectives, just little kind of investigations into various aspects of games, no matter where they're played. And today we are talking about the role playing game genre as a whole. We are talking about RPGs, folks. They are, games that a lot of us have played for a long time. And I think as we'll get into our discussion, we're going to find out that we actually, played a lot more than we maybe thought we did. Because when I was like starting my research into this episode, as I was getting things ready, looking into the history of RPGs, I knew a lot of the origins from my experience in tabletop. But what I found is like there really is no real definitive classification or like a definition of what classifies an RPG. Like I tried searching in Wikipedia what is an RPG, seeing like what do they give as the general explanation, but the characteristics are always loosely applied, so it's really kind of open to interpretation over what is an RPG. So I want to start the episode by opening the floor to you guys. What defines an RPG to you? And we're talking tabletop or video games. Any aspect. So what do we got?
Yeah, I think I was as I was thinking about this episode, I was having a similar thought process of what does define an RPG and what RPGs have I played, and it's really a pretty broad spectrum across a lot of the gaming I've done. And for me personally, I think an RPG kind of the line that it sets for me is having the ability to customize the skills or attributes of the player you're taking on. That kind of is where I draw the line personally of an RPG. Like I think some people will think of them as requiring a little bit more control of the story or your character's participation in the world. But for me, it's more at that kind of technical level of being able to determine where your character goes from a skill standpoint. I don't know how everyone else feels, but that's kind of how I define an RPG personally.
I'm a loot goblin, so I like to collect the loots. I like collecting things. So I definitely agree with the skill tree uh aspect, and that's part of the collecting for me. But I really like
So that's
things,
that's that's
shiny
an
things.
aspect of like exploration. It definitely
Yeah.
seems like having things with the world to uncover.
I'd say, for me at least, the broadest end of the spectrum of what I would consider to be an RPG is a game that you can self-insert yourself and you can role play as the character. There's a lot of games set themselves up with a silent protagonist so that you, the player, could sit there and self-input what you would say to people. That is like this conversation back and forth, or how you would be. That's like the idea, at least, behind the silent protagonist. And I think that is where I would draw the broader limits of what I would just consider an RPG. Something where you can put yourself in the shoes of the character that's playing, and role playing game.
And I kind of come down maybe a little bit closer to you, Rick, but like I definitely agree with Matt's assessment as well, that it's more about immersion, not necessarily interactivity, as you were pointing out, Rick, that it's less about the having the impact on the story and how things are unfolding. I think that to have a more broad definition of it, it is more about the personal development of your character. I think that has a practical basis in the true origins of of RPGs as a whole, which we'll get to. They have since obviously grown from that, and tabletop games in particular, I would say there is a difference in what necessarily you would classify defining a tabletop RPG and a CRPG, that I think that interactivity is more crucial to a tabletop RPG experience. Like, it still obviously has the core mechanic of character leveling, of progressive development, but it is about how you're about feeling that your choices have impact in the world. But that gets to what you were saying, Matt. It's about immersion. It's about feeling like you're part of the story that's unfolding.
Yeah, there are definitely some RPGs that I've played where you don't have the same amount of agency over the story as, say, like a Skyrim, for example, with the amount of choices you get. You know, it's a little more linear in that sense, but like it's all about if you can drop yourself into that place, you know, and feel like you're part of the story.
Right. So I think that's kind of almost like a more kind of meta conception of what is an RPG that I really like. Whereas then there's the nittier kind of
Oh yeah,
gritty
you got to have a
bits.
skill tree. You got to be able to customize. You got to like,
And then there's certain things like I mean, you basically you can't have most RPGs without some kind of combat. You know, whether how the combat plays out is obviously going to be different and mechanically unique to a particular subtype, but you know, combat's usually a thing. Exploration to some extent is a thing, even though there are more linear or narratively linear type RPGs that I think still fit in the thing. But I think a lot of people would get stuck on, I think Rick, you said this, you know, like that, oh, you've got to have like a dialogue tree. You know, you've got to in your CRPG. That's the only way to simulate true role playing in the CRPG or in that arena. And I'm a little more open-minded.
One thing I'd like to add, a good RPG lets you button mash through the dialogue if you just want to get to the combat.
I never do that. I always
I gotta
love
read the
cutscenes.
dialogue.
I love cutscenes.
No, see, and you know, I was thinking about that after we were playing Back for Blood the other day, and you're like, you wanted to watch the campaign scenes. I was like, no, I just want to get to the shooting. Like, just let me skip this
through
shit.
it.
I was gonna say, I'm just definitely the type of person who at least has to see the scene once before I skip through it.
I just think of button mashing through Pokemon, putting the text on like super speed.
Pokemon made me like I like to read the text, but I hate waiting for it to like appear. So if I can make the text appear quicker, I'll like skip but I'll read the text. I don't completely want to skip the cutscene personally.
No, that's fair. I would maybe Pokemon is like what made me a better reader. Just reading that shit really quick, just button mashing through as fast as I can.
Yeah, just critical retention skills. Kids, don't ever let your parents say that video games are rotting your brain.
Hooked on Pokemon phonics.
And then so bringing that up, critical retention skills. I was trying to think this through, but I'll say it now. I think a good part of RPGs is the like hard, like real life skills you could learn from it. Especially with like the building the skill trees, the exploration, there's organizational skills you could learn, especially thinking about Pokemon, like the limitations within your Pokemon boxes and trying to like organize them properly to, fit the teams that you want, or like, even building your characters on individual teams, like you're strategizing. So I think role-playing games, like that is another part of the immersion, is like the real life skills that you learn from playing and like can apply to the game.
You can get some real life feelings from some of these games too.
Yeah.
You can lose a party member, and that could be, that could be a whole game's worth of interaction with that character that are gone now. Like that can be hard.
It is a fascinating aspect of these games that they are, primarily kind of fantastical in origin, whether it's like literal fantasy or sci-fi. Games more in like the JRPG genre have gone a little bit more, or go for a little bit more realism in some of their setting lines, their storylines, but that fantastical element does not preclude the ability to gain real experience and real social skills. Take like a pen and paper RPG thing. You're playing with real people, and yeah, these characters are made up. The world is made up, but like there's a real person behind it, and you've got to navigate this world and understand how you fit into it with this group of people. It's it helps teach collectivism.
Yeah, and it's a good way to model skills in the low stakes
Mm-hmm.
environment, and like that's what a lot of people need to learn is that, the low stakes environment that kind of like makes it fun. So I think role playing games could be really important for that.
Low stakes environment. Don't play Fire Emblem. that permadeath system is no joke.
Yeah, we'll get to the real we'll get into like the cultural impact and the social impact of these games later on. But first, I think we want to dive a little bit into a brief history of role-playing games as an overall genre. I think some of us could use to either learn or some refreshers on at this point, the ancient history of role-playing games. We simply just weren't alive when these games were being really pioneered. So I think it'll be worthwhile to go through. However, I will say that this is by no means meant to be comprehensive in any way. The games I'm listing are, you could argue are not, maybe they are not as foundational as some people think, or there's debate about all these things, but the ones I pointed out just maybe have a possible interesting development, whether technical or actual game design, or thematic differences. But to kick things off, we must go back thousands of years to ancient China, where large groups of people would be organized by the state to carry out these large scale military reenactments. These are some of like the first kind of recorded history of these kind of role playing, because it's one thing we also forgot. There is live action role playing.
Yeah, the original LARPers.
Yeah.
LARP.
That count. Those are RPGs as well. There are testaments of basically them conducting reenactments of large scale battles where everybody is dressed up in the appropriate garb from an earlier era, and they would be held around specific festivals and memorials to again just engage in these different roles of a different era. So that is worth noting, because it's interesting to think of the idea of role playing obviously has been around for a long time, well before the first commercially sold role playing game. But it is worth noting because those original games have their own history in the idea of war games, of wargaming, which is a much earlier hobby. So primarily it'd be like historical wargaming, so using miniature figures to reenact real world battles from historical eras, like the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the Napoleonic Wars are a very popular one. World War II is now the most popular historical wargaming era, but it's interesting to see those kind of the roots that that RPGs have in that particular genre. I mean, it kind of is impossible to divorce that in its history, because as I mentioned, the first officially or commercially sold role-playing game is Dungeons and Dragons, which goes on sale in 1974. This new phenomenon, as it kind of started off as a niche kind of thing in the wargaming community, that eventually grew, but it was based off of rules developed by the eventual creators of D&D, Gary Gygax and I think it's Dave Arneson. I hope I didn't get that wrong. But they created a set of wargaming rules for like a medieval era. It was called chainmail, and that is essentially the real first edition of Dungeons and Dragons is Chainmail. That was then further developed to the original release of Dungeons and Dragons, which, so again, you have to understand that at the time, D&D was a tactical miniatures based war game. That's really what it still is at its core. The mechanics are reflected, even within the new 5th edition, are still reflected in that. That is what the mechanics at its base are. The class system, the spells, the abilities, all that stuff surrounds combat. And these were just dungeon delvers. The iconic Tomb of Horrors is literally a meat grinder that's just, testing you to see how far you could make it. There were no like real narrative elements to it. It was purely exploration, the idea of leveling, character progression, that kind of stuff. But that, so that is where what we can consider the modern era of wargaming has its origins, is for better or worse in Dungeons and Dragons, which itself has its origins in wargaming. A side note, I have a picture saved somewhere. I'll see if I can save it. Maybe we can put it in the show notes of Peter Cushing, the Grand Moff Tarkin, sitting at his desk painting Napoleonic soldiers. The man was a gamer. So, Rick, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how it's interesting that this vast definition of what an RPG is really does start with what's more or less just strategy games. That then like kind of have evolved to have these more narrative and built out type of settings. But I do find that interesting.
These were extremely nerdy dads in the 70s.
Yeah, exactly. And like I totally have, from childhood trips down to good old Williamsburg, Virginia, where you can pretend it's still revolutionary times, but just forget about slavery.
Yeah, convenient, right?
Yeah, it's super convenient. It feels very fun and quaint. But they totally have minifigs that I absolutely bought as like an 8-year-old because I thought those things were cool with their tricorn hats and front loading rifles.
Those are called muskets.
Thanks. Yeah, I lost the word.
I saved you from the hunting crowd.
I went to Fort Ticonderoga as a kid, and I still have some, or maybe it got lost. They sold like musket balls, and I thought it was so cool. It was probably just like a poisonous piece of lead.
Yeah, just a lead ball.
just gave me lead brain.
Here you go, kid. Put this in your mouth.
Yeah, it's a sucker.
But yeah, so D&D comes out, the first real edition. This is before it becomes Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Comes out in 1974, and this coincides with the emerging computer age. The first computers, the first mainframe video games, which were these big ass computers, usually just owned by universities. They started coming up at the exact same time. So it's like the first tabletop role-playing games come out, and then these, basically they're just graduate students or whatever at universities just dicking around doing a unlicensed Dungeons and Dragons video game on these big mainframe computers. So these were called, multi-user dungeons, or MUDs.
Let's be honest, who hasn't had their school computers got games on it hidden somewhere?
Oh yeah, we had Mario Kart. It was amazing, and Halo. Yeah,
I was gonna say we had Halo 2.
Halo 2 was in the science lab, the science computer lab,
and in the
library,
the CAD lab.
I'm pretty sure the library only had Mario Kart.
I thought Halo 2 was also in the library lab.
It's possible.
I remember people playing Halo 2 during CAD, intro to CAD, 9th grade.
We had Star Fox 64 on the computers in the engineering lab in college.
That sounds amazing. But so yeah, the first official, or is the first MUD of prominence was the aptly named Dungeon, released or created in somewhere in between 1975 and 76. And yeah, this was literally just a cut and paste of the original D&D rules, but just put into this mainframe computer. They boasted some really impressive stuff. despite it, like, speeds and everything being really small, like they had like fully generated dungeons with enemies with, very crude AI. And or maybe I think they had NPCs with AI. I don't necessarily think they had combat AI at that point. That is a game somewhat later on, still in this kind of booming era. These are all unofficial. These are just things that were, again, made on these mainframe computers that were interconnected at some level. I don't know enough about the history of that technology to know exactly how interconnected they were, but there's several other games came out. One called I found this one strange, Petit 5, but it's more colloquially referred to as The Dungeon. Came out also in 1975, was built for the Plato system, which is like the thing that gave us email and message forums. So basically
the downfall of humanity.
It's Skynet. It's basically real world Skynet.
ARPANET. That was the first internet.
Yeah.
I think that's around at this time. That's in the 50s.
But yeah, that's purely military grade shit.
The military, yeah.
I think by this point it has been like for private
right. No,
universities,
the universities were the first to
like
get
public institutions.
I remember I've talked to
Yeah.
my dad a while back about it. It was like, he was in the universities at that time. That was basically, he had access to like some of the first email, like ever got.
Yeah, I had a professor that was the same thing, and like they were like on punch cards or something that you could like, yeah.
Fortran.
All right, so now we get to probably the first game that we all are actually familiar with, at least by the name. 1980 saw the release of Rogue, a dungeon crawler that built upon a lot of the ideas of that were pioneered in The Dungeon. The idea of completing runs, randomized enemy generation. That's where The Dungeon was really making moves. But this kind of made waves by introducing the concept of permadeath. So the idea that death is a lasting thing that can end your run rather than just, having multiple lives to regenerate and restart. And it, as we'll see, generated its own subgenre of games, the roguelikes and the roguelites and all that. But it also started dealing with or creating randomly generated dungeon maps so that like no two runs were the same. Like these are all things that, again, they're building on one another.
The roguelikes, the roguelites.
Exactly. No, it's like, but it was the first to do it, and that was back in 1980. It was originally, designed as one of these MUDs on a mainframe computer, but it was eventually ported over to PCs in 1984.
How has there not been a movie where a roguelike sentient video game kills you in real life once you die in the game?
Isn't that basically Jumanji?
I mean, like Jumanji's, I guess, somewhat the kid-friendly version. That's fair. I'll give you that. All right.
Kid-friendly. Those
Rock and Kevin Hart in it.
Yeah.
All right. But yeah, so we've now see things start to shift to the first personal computers that here in the West start becoming commercially available and accessible around this time, just basically in the early 80s. We have
the true downfall of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean that's really when Facebook, now Meta, comes around.
So we've got some games here that I'll quickly go through. We've got the Temple of Abshai, released in 79 or finished in 1980. I forget. Was considered the first graphical RPG. Had some real-time combat functions, and this is where we start getting rudimentary enemy AI. So like where you're you move away, they come after you, they start using their own resources and stuff like that. Then we have an interestingly titled 1980 game, Odyssey, the Complete, spelled COMPLEAT, App Venture. It was built specifically for the Apple II.
I saw that in the notes and I was like,
is it
a typo? And then I saw that it was for Apple II and I was like, of course. And it started from their origins that they had to make fucking like weird punny names for
Right.
their shit.
And not only that,
Yeah,
but
that's because
starting with
Tim
their
Apple's a smart
exclusivity
man.
too.
Yes, yeah, their exclusivity, exactly.
But yeah, like the Apple II was the main purveyor of RPGs. Like most of the games built at this time were built specifically for the Apple II. They ran the best on the Apple II.
And I love that like Mac or Apple users now have like no gaming
Mhm.
capabilities except for like shitty mobile games that you can
Right.
play on a
Yeah,
laptop.
no, all I can do is, play Magic the Gathering Arena, and that's it.
You could put Duel Links on there, Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links as well.
You'll never get me. But yeah, so the only notable thing I guess about Odyssey that I have is it was the first use of the overworld map. So the idea of getting a look at the larger settings, because before it's like basically again you're just in a dungeon. So this had a concept of you go above world and you can go to somewhere else and you can find other dungeons. And so a lot of these games, again, why I'm kind of mentioning them is just when you look at it, there's just a kind of a clear progression from one to the other, and it's just they're developing these concepts that to us just seem simple and that are these kind of fundamental, like rudimentary parts of what makes in particular a CRPG. What it is are these things that were developed over time, and for a while, again, they were just literally hack and slash in a pixelated dungeon, and that's basically it. The last one I guess I have from this era is Aklabeth, The World of Doom, also coming out in 1980, was kind of a big boom year. It was created by then teenager Richard Garriott, who went on to design the foundational Ultima CRPG series. This game, Aklabeth, is largely considered the first CRPG published for commercial sale. Previous games, like Rogue and all these other things were freely distributed, or again, were just localized to university mainframe computers. But Aklabeth was like, this kid was like, he was like 15 at the time, like made some deal with like a small publisher, and they sold like 3,000 copies or something.
Does this sound like Grandma's Boy? The Prodigy guy?
JP.
Right.
Yeah.
JP.
I designed a game. Didn't he say 15?
It's
Yeah,
like
I think so.
Yeah, it's like 15 or 14 or something.
Potentially the inspiration.
Yeah, maybe.
Sorry, you were just saying it, and I'm just sitting there like, this sounds like, where have I heard this before? And then he told me to sit on his face, and I was like, there it is. I remember now.
Matt, did you ever play any of the Ultima games?
I did not.
So they were all, again, mostly way before our time, and the kind of the last one that was maybe in an era where we could have played was so bad that it killed the series. But it's not really important. But I do have an interesting note though on the Ultima series itself. It signaled a shift in design. It responded to the moral panic of the 80s, of the era, by focusing on story versus the more traditional hack and slash kind of thing where you're fighting literal demons and that kind of stuff. It was this was exemplified in Ultima 4, where the explicit goal of the game, is not to defeat some, crazy lich villain, you're not dealing with witches and sorcery, but it's rather the quest to become a better person. And apparently like, this is a joke, by the way, I have to say that apparently Ultima 6 solves racism.
That's finally
awesome. Like they were, it is interesting though that they were explicitly this was like the shift into story being a main focus.
I think the moral of the story here is that Richard Garriott gave into the pressure of cancel culture and moral panic and changed his creative vision to comply with these libs.
Well, it seemed that most consumers they vibed with it though.
They did. All right.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is like the rise of or the beginnings of like the apolitical centrist that doesn't want to hear about about racism and doesn't want is colorblind and
Well, obviously, the Ultima series solved that. So
that's what I'm saying. So it was
Yeah, that
perfect
was
for them. They were
that
catering
was
to their
essentially the
audience.
main plot. It's like you're dealing with some group of peoples that are being. I looked up the plot. I don't remember. It is now gone through my brain. It's been memory hold.
I just want to know what it would be like if I took like, what's a good example? Maybe like Astral Chain or like Shin Megami Tensei or any of these like modern JRPGs back to the 80s and be like, yeah, look, you guys won. And show them just worlds covered in demons and
But yeah, so that's a good transition to RPGs start to go global. Because at that point, basically they're solely relegated to personal computers, to PCs. In the West, or say the West mainly, America being the be all end all consumer. We had them first, and we were the main then consumers of these games. Say due to the economic limitations and certain technical barriers of the time, there was very little public consumption of RPGs in countries like Japan during this initial original rise in the West, because they were effectively kind of 10 years behind us in their economic boon, where ours was in the 80s, theirs was in the 90s. But PCs are not available in Japan. They are
then that
Yep,
fateful year.
1983. Nintendo revitalizes the industry that had itself essentially crashed in the
Home
aptly named
console.
video game crash of 1983, in Japan known as the Atari shock. But they released, it was called the Famicom in Japan, but then
Family computer.
yeah, but then when it was eventually moved to the West, it was rebranded as the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Do you remember just, I know it's different than the Famicom, but just having like a family computer running on
Oh my
like
God.
Windows 97,
Yep.
like,
Yeah.
they had to be in the living
gateway,
room.
How
big
many
white
how many
gateway
old
box.
Dells did I brick with downloading songs on LimeWire?
LimeWire. Playing, what was it?
But like I
Freddy the Fish.
I remember it truly was a family computer, like that you had to be able to be monitored by your parents because they're afraid of what you're gonna see. And now like 4-year-olds are walking around with an iPhone and an iPad just attached to each hand.
And they're better at it than their parents.
Yeah. Probably could turn off the parental controls and not even have their parents know.
If we want to do a little aside into the events of the video game crash of 1983, it was
I am interested.
E.T.
An interesting time. It lasted. It was a large scale recession lasting between 1983 to 1985, mostly in the U.S. But it was
It was the release of E.T. that really like hammered it home.
there. I mean, the real reasons that are cited today include market saturation, the number of consoles, the number of games. Like, again, there was basically a spike in I was looking into the numbers. There's something like the purchase of video games had gone up like 100% in like a year, but the production of the games themselves went up something like 175%, so that they were just flooding these stores with, and for the most part, really cheap, really shitty games that
Yes,
yeah,
E.T.
that just soured people on the idea of video games. They like became a laughing stock. They were not profitable. Stores were trying to like sell or like send their overstock back to these producers, and it caused companies to fold like immediately.
And then Big Daddy Nintendo.
Yeah, they step in and really kind of save the day with the NES. But that's where we see companies like Atari essentially not being able to recover.
A shell of their former glory.
There's a whole lot to get into. We could spend probably a whole episode on on this that we won't, but it was the popularity of the Nintendo, the viability of it really, saw this kind of resurgence in video games as a whole. This is a time where essentially, again, video games just weren't a thing, and also consoles were just a non-starter. There's still this then also creates a split in the development of RPGs in particular, because we now have a popular, now affordable way for non-Western consumers to play these games through things like a console that understandably are not as high powered as those early home computers. So there are hardware limitations that force a more simplified version of RPG mechanics. Things like you only can control a single player versus you used to control a whole party, again, because to this time basically every single, again, Western RPG is basically a D&D clone. It's using, if not the exact rules, it is, again, just a clone. You have more action style combat instead of turn-based things. You have limited character movement. That was a specific thing because of like the controller on the NES. Like, you just did not have as wide range of movement, so it was more simplified game design. And the first big name one was 1986 Dragon Quest, a smash hit in Japan.
This day,
yeah, it is, laid the groundwork for the major differences between RPGs for console and PC that remain to this day. That's is why I thought it was important to bring it up. Is you have the NES that, again, has these technical limitations, that then you see a divergence of how the game plays on RPGs designed and sold for consoles versus PC. Like, you can't get as in depth and do as much stuff on a console. So the way the game is designed itself is different, and how it plays is very different. But I know Matt has lots to say about the booming JRPGs.
Don't forget, one of the most appealing things about the Dragon Quest series is that it's done in part with Akira Toriyama, maybe a small, little known Dragon Ball artist and developer and, author. And so there's a lot of that Dragon Ball charm there, and that animation that you just can't recreate with anyone else.
I looked it up because I was only familiar with some of the newer games, and my first reaction was like, oh shit, what is this like in the Dragon Ball Z canon?
Nope, just Akira Toriyama.
Yeah, no, it's incredible, and the artwork change from then to now is huge.
Dragon Quest is one of those games that has just been foundational. Like Dragon Quest 11, you can get it on PC even now.
Really?
Yes, it's a great game. Can't recommend enough.
And the series is still active, right?
Yep, they're making another one, Dragon Quest 12. Dragon Quest 11 is on every major console. It's on, Switch, Xbox, PlayStation, PC.
Yeah, I've not played any of the Dragon Quest games before.
Dragon Quest 11 is a good place because outside of the first three, which are really a trilogy, every other Dragon Quest is a self-contained story.
Oh, okay.
So you don't need previous games worth of knowledge, and Dragon Quest 11 is a great place to jump in.
So how would you define like this kind of characteristic split between Western and JRPGs that really kind of starts with Dragon Quest?
It's an interesting point because at that point in time, a lot of the big differences were hardware limitations of the NES. You just don't have the same amount of straight choices that affect the game. It's much more limited in your scope, much more limited in what you can do. But what they really go for with JRPGs is they really try to get that story tight knit to pull you through.
Strong narrative.
And Dragon Quest follows a very strong narrative. And it's one of the foundational series. They, to this day, in Japan, when a new Dragon Quest game comes out, most companies just give the employees the day off.
Amazing.
Because they would rather.
That's awesome.
We can't even get a voting election day off in America.
A truly enlightened
everyone's
society.
getting day off for video games.
But there's an interesting point, is because Dragon Quest was 1986, and then 1 year later, another foundational JRPG series on the NES was launched, known as Final Fantasy. And the reason it was originally called Final Fantasy was because it was Square Enix's last-ditch effort to make a profitable game. They were on their ropes trying to get a game to stick on market because, it's only been a year of Dragon Quest at this point. They haven't really gotten a whole lot of traction, especially outside of the Japanese market. So they released a little-known title known as Final Fantasy.
And oh boy.
And while each game is not final, that is another one that iterates. It's slightly different than Dragon Quest. They go for, especially Final Fantasy VII onwards, embraces a lot more of the sci-fi aspect of a storytelling, whereas Dragon Quest tends to stick more pure fantasy, and like earlier Final Fantasy stuck with a harder fantasy line, and like Final Fantasy IX kind of went back to that as an homage.
That is one thing I did see, is that JRPGs did expand and kind of explore more of setting possibilities than more Western RPGs, where again, at the time, the Western RPG is explicitly fantasy, if not again just the dungeon crawler, whereas JRPGs were more willing to explore, like I think I mentioned this earlier, more kind of what you could consider both more grounded storylines, like more kind of set in our what you could consider more realism, a more real world, as well as still more speculative stuff like science fiction. And Final Fantasy is the one that always pops up as the one that has most successfully blended the two.
Well, I mean, Final Fantasy VII, the first one that really made that jump, discusses a story around people who are labeled as eco-terrorists, mind you, because saving the planet is terrorism, trying to shut down an energy corporation from sucking the life force of the planet out of to run cities.
Oh, and another interesting thing I saw was that because Japanese culture is more open to exploration of ideas of religion, and in particular atheism, that it really signaled a huge shift in its thematic differences between Western RPGs, things that again would have provoked the moral panic type stuff.
A lot of early JRPGs, and even to this day, a big trope is the big religious cult that might seem like they're okay in the beginning are definitely the ones behind everything, and like they definitely have nefarious means.
Yeah, so what I would classify as the defining bit of JRPGs is, while they may have at least originated with more technical limitations, they were more open to explore thematic components and narrative.
Yeah, you tend to end up fighting gods at some point or other.
Yeah, any other insights into JRPGs which we could really credit with saving video games as a whole?
I mean, you can talk about the discussion around how early JRPGs went with a very strictly turn-based combat, again, as a limitation of the system. But as time has developed, they've adapted with the times to, switch to more of an active battle situation for a lot of them. Even though some franchises have stuck to their roots of the turn-based combat. You've got Persona, you've got the Pokemon series.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. Before we recorded, Mike was like, I'm worried that I haven't played enough RPGs. And then Matt and I were just hanging out yesterday, and we're just like, he's literally played the most popular JRPG of all time.
And so many hours of it. So many hours. Copious.
One of the highest selling game series.
One of the highest selling media properties ever.
The Disney of Japan. One thing I wanted to add about JRPGs is they also brought us the oversized sword.
I mean, that's more of just
always a favorite of mine.
An anime.
That's an anime trope in general.
Yeah.
I mean, you're telling me you haven't watched Naruto and seen Zabuza pull out the butcher blade and been like, oh yeah, that feels realistic.
But as I was saying, like JRPGs, saved video games in the 80s, but it's one thing that's weird to see is it coincides, with the, rise and fall, the booms and busts that are, the defining natures of capitalism. that video games, they rise in popularity and sales, and then they fucking crash. So there was one in the 80s, another less intense but still a strong recession of game sales happens in the early 1990s as we move into this kind of next era of gaming. Developers struggle to adapt. RPGs in general is like, this is really it's like this more so than the 80s. This was the most precarious era for the RPG. This is the like it is RPGs are kind of colloquially referred to as, the genre that almost died. And it was in this era that they came the closest to being snuffed out. And it was, due to a whole set of factors. Like I said, developers struggling to adapt them to new and advancing technology, creating increased development times. So games that were being pumped out on like a yearly basis are now taking 3-5 years, and there's just nothing new coming out. RPGs have stagnated. Their sales are dipping. Nothing, just people aren't playing them. However, not the case for JRPGs. JRPGs, once they basically took off, never stopped. They never looked back. We saw in the West then a rise of more action-oriented games like Doom. Doom takes over. It's the FPS is the game to play now. That's what it's all about.
GoldenEye, Doom, Turok.
GoldenEye. What a great
I think
game.
it's kind of interesting how you say that like these RPGs were considered the game that almost died, especially because I don't know, you look at our current gaming landscape.
Everything's almost an RPG at this point.
Exactly.
Everyone's got a skill tree.
Exactly. Even your FPSs at this point have a lot of RPG
elements
type of mechanics or components baked into them, to the point where it's like it's almost all mainstream games besides those that are really truly like first person shooter story driven games. Almost all of them are very close to something you could call an RPG at this point.
Stay tuned for the episode where we discuss how Fortnite is an RPG, folks.
But it's real, and it goes back to, I think we'll touch on this, but it goes back to D&D, creating the whole idea of levels and hit points. It is foundational little kind of, again, mechanical elements that just basically no game has basically can work without at this point. It's almost every game involves some level of a RPG game element in it to this day. However, they're not doing well in the 90s. They're struggling to get sales. There's no good games coming out. But then there are a few, they're basically series, but whether the start of them, it's the first ones obviously were what signaled the renaissance of RPGs and what has really taken us now into this modern era.
It's pronounced Renaissance.
Renaissance. The
Renaissance.
The three that stick out from the 90s are Diablo, an action RPG with some of the first online co-op has become
the dungeon looter.
Yes, the most successful dungeon crawler of all time. Then we have Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2, which I think was actually more successful, but those were like there had been previous licensed D&D video games. Some of the oldest ones were called like the Gold Box series. They were just adventures that were put into I think they were for PC, and some were okay. They were okay. They were never groundbreaking. That's really why I didn't mention them before. But Baldur's Gate is probably considered the most successful official D&D CRPG, closely followed by the Neverwinter Nights series as well. But they're based off like the same engine, and I think
Ben, don't you mean that the Dungeons and Dragons Dark Alliance video game is the most successful? It's clearly the most recent.
I've only heard bad things about it.
Yeah, no, that was not a good game.
But yeah, Baldur's Gate smash hit, huge. I'm still waiting for Baldur's Gate 3 to come out in full release. They've been in early access release for like over a year now. So I'm excited for that one to come out.
I
But
mean,
then
you're not a big shot podcaster to get
no, they
early
have
access.
you can get it on
release.
Steam early access. It just means it's
Yeah,
incomplete. It's not
it's
it's
beta.
not the full game. You can only play like the first
Early access, like
the
Steam
first
early
act,
access, not
and it's like dog shit. You know,
Gotcha.
it's like there's a shit ton of bugs and stuff still.
Gotcha.
They're working all that stuff out and then constantly adding new stuff. But I'm not paying $60 now for a third of a game. Even though, yeah, you get it when it fully comes out, but I'll wait. But then the other one was the original Fallout. I know that one was 1998 because I just started playing some of that myself on because they're all on Game Pass. They look janky as hell, those original games, but they're still fun to play.
So
They're still really fun to play. I was just killing rats in a cave.
It's one of those things that I think for a lot of people, if you played them when you were younger or have some nostalgia for them, it's a lot easier to go back and overlook some of the jankiness. But if you've never experienced that jankiness, it can pretty much turn you off to some of them.
I mean, I can't say I ever played games of that era, and I've never played a Fallout game before, but I still enjoyed it.
I appreciated the isometric view?
Yes. Like traditional Diablo.
I think that like
no, those were
the
that all
jankiness
of these games of that time
know?
were the same, were isometric like that.
That was the best way of doing 3D without having to do 3D.
All right, so those games signaled the return of the Phoenix from the flames, burning brighter than ever before. These games huge. They've launched successful series.
Franchises that run to this day.
And it's so that those are the main ones from the 90s. Then I think technically still in the 90s we get the first Elder Scrolls game. But it's not until 2000s that we get the real important Elder Scrolls ones. We get Morrowind in 2002, which again I've never played, but is arguably had a huge impact on game design. Still, it's like you're not going to find a current RPG that doesn't have the bones of Morrowind found in it somewhere. But then we got Oblivion in 2006. People will always argue which is better, which is the better Elder Scrolls, Oblivion or Skyrim. But it's Oblivion 2006 and Skyrim in 2011. Now the best selling RPG ever. Constantly being re-released. What is the one that's coming up?
We just got the anniversary edition,
yeah.
didn't we?
Yeah.
Or isn't it coming out like next week or something like that?
I think it's soon, but I mean, continues to be actively played.
Right. And we
to this day a full 10 years of.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure the anniversary edition is just legitifying mods, isn't it? Just like adding the fishing mod to the base game.
And I feel that's important. I think that's a useful thing to bring up is the whole modding concept and community. I think that's a big reason why these games have remained so popular. Is the ability for anybody to interact with them in that level and really stretch your, in a sense, those are role-playing muscles, like your world building at that point.
Well, yeah, who wouldn't want to play Skyrim without the Thomas the Tank Engine mod replacing the dragons? Like that's day one stuff.
Hell yeah. Man, I can just imagine Alduin coming out and just like with a smiling face and just honk honk. Just his awesome. motionless grin, just like emptiness behind those googly eyes. But then I'd say the last game that I think I'm going to mention in our brief history here is KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic. Basically the first Star Wars RPG and what is considered, the best Star Wars story period. Is also again still played to this day. We are anxiously awaiting the remake, hoping it's against hope that it's not going to be dog shit, but
doo dog shit.
I don't know. That's PS5 exclusive, right? PS5 and PC.
Well, it's the one that it's going to be on PS5. Initially, but yeah, it will.
and PC, and it'll be on
Right.
Xbox.
It's like a year
later.
Yes.
later
Okay.
or something.
Yeah,
Correct.
it'll be good.
I'm gonna play.
I think that'll be
I
fun.
don't give a fuck. I'm gonna play.
Yeah.
It. But yeah, so
You should get the old one on Switch so you could play the old one first.
for our sake, I think we can end our history there, because we're basically that we're getting into
We're now in basic
the
modern
era
times where we'll be discussing games that we've
exactly.
played.
But as we kind of saw from this history, we see these games developing on each other, then branching out and essentially creating all these different subgenres. And that then goes back to our conversation at the beginning, is that almost anything can be an RPG now. There are so many different types, whether it's an action RPG, an MMO RPG, roguelikes, tactical RPGs, JRPGs, sandbox, the monster hunter gatherer stuff, a Pokemon, Digimon, that kind of thing. Like, there are all these subgenres. Like, you think like, oh yeah, that's not an RPG. An RPG, yeah, is about like skill, or not just is skill trees and dialogue trees. That's, if it doesn't have those two things, it's not a role-playing game, which again I think we have officially debunked that is not the case. That is more about immersion.
Because I mean, like, would you consider Breath of the Wild to be an RPG?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Matt,
exactly. It's so
Matt and I were also asking, like,
broad.
would you consider games like God of War or the Assassin's Creed games RPGs? So hell, Assassin's Creed.
Yeah.
So Assassin's
Especially
Creed, you're
the new
literally
ones.
playing a guy who's
Yes.
doing essentially a role-playing game.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's a role-playing game inside a role-playing game.
Inside a role-playing game.
I mean, the early
Y-mail models.
Assassin's Creeds, for sure, you could argue maybe not so much because you're sticking to that more linear story. But now with the new ones, like we said, like everything has become an RPG, and there's almost, we're at like a technological point where, and I guess like financial point where they could just milk money off of RPGs.
Well, RPGs
Assassin's Creed
inflate playtime, and the longer you keep someone
That's
playing
what
a
I'm
game,
saying.
the more you get them hooked to buy the DLC or buy expansions. Or it's
Right.
about hooking someone onto a game and getting them all of it out of them.
Well, it works well for the monetization,
Yeah.
games as a service model, like Destiny at this point, which was a first person. I mean, it's a looter shooter, so I guess to that extent, those all fall into an RPG category in my mind. Is all the looter
Borderlands and
shooters, more or
Destiny would
less.
definitely have a
Doing
lot.
that with the Tiny Tina's Wonderland, they're framing that as them playing
Exactly.
a literal tabletop RPG.
Yeah. So I do think, Mike, to your point, part of that is just because it's easier to monetize, so they throw these concepts in that way and add playtime.
Yeah, think of the Assassin's Creed soft reboot. Like, they moved away from the that linear story. They made it, Origins, Odyssey, and now Valhalla. It's like you're in this world. You're not in a story. You're in a world, and you're interacting with the world. They have these DLCs that add different portions to the world. But I've put in like 60 hours to Valhalla. I don't even know if I've played like 3 of the missions that, like, for the main story, because there's so many side missions to do. Like, it truly is like immersive, and they do that as a way to milk money from you, because of course I've spent money on different skins and shit because I like
I was
the
about
aesthetics.
to point out that especially Ubisoft is the most guilty of this. And what I've noticed is that they put RPG elements in and then link you to the Ubisoft store where you can buy XP boosts or like upgrade
this
materials
armor.
or
Maps.
Because they did that in Immortals
to
Phoenix
find all the
Rising,
certain
which
loot.
soured me on the game pretty bad. Other than the fact that there was a bug that I encountered that physically made me incapable of completing the game, so I put it away.
Oh God!
It locked me in a boss fight that I couldn't break out of even after I won, without like resetting save file.
I think this has been like, or this is showing the real impact of RPGs is the fact that again, every game every major game that people are playing now just has RPG stuff or DNA baked into
Gonna
it.
say RPGs saved what is now one of the more popular RPG makers for modern games, which is From Software.
Mm,
If it wasn't for Demon Souls, they would have shuttered up as a studio.
right.
Demon Souls was one of their last ditch efforts, and it made a lot of traction out west, which was what they needed because they couldn't get games to stick out here.
But yeah, like it again, it all goes back to D&D, for better or worse. The ideas of, these progressive level systems, the concepts of hit points uh and armor
Getting
class and
stronger.
skill trees and all that kind of stuff. That's just, you don't play a modern game that doesn't have that any of those elements in it anymore. And we see that, just reflected in the industry. But I definitely think that we're seeing now RPGs are having an even greater cultural impact. I mean, we have the whole satanic panic bullshit in the 80s that obviously
And
D&D
90s again.
had a huge role, but I don't think we'll go too much into that because I feel like that's going to be fodder for future in-depth episodes talking about things like that. But
Shameless plug.
But it's been felt, in our culture for a long time. Just it's has gone beyond actual gaming. And so one little thing that I see as an avid reader of speculative fiction, it's like pretty much every major author that's active right now, they trace their origins as storytellers to D&D. A good example is the best-selling series Malazan Book of the Fallen by crap. Why don't I've only read the first two books of that. There's like 10 of them. So I forget. I think it's something
Pretty prolific.
Something Erickson is that his is the author's name? Steven Erickson. Yeah, I didn't want to get it wrong. But yeah, he's like talked about how this series is based off of his old D&D campaign. And someone who knows D&D, you read his story, it's all about these people becoming gods. It's like the whole concept of, or these, the world of mortals being the playing ground for these ascendants who are literally we're just mortal people who have, followed these paths to become gods. And you see the this is the adventuring party, this is the conflicts that are spreading out, and you're seeing people, like the interconnection of characters and all that stuff. It's anybody who has played these games, you can see in these popular stories where it all comes from.
Do they have a rogue class character that just hides
all the time? I mean, yeah, there's one of the main characters, Kalem, is an assassin. Assassino. And now also we're seeing popular RPGs getting adapted into live action media of all sorts. There's the Witcher Netflix show,
the Assassin's Creed
movie.
movie.
We don't talk about that. We don't talk about that. These ones are like up. These next ones are upcoming though. Apparently, Amazon is doing a Fallout show, and Warner Brothers is doing something with Mass Effect. That one is unclear. It's been said it's a movie, but it's still in such level of pre-production. People are like, oh, it's probably going to end up being a series or something instead.
We're also getting what's it called, Uncharted, sort of.
See, that's one. That's one I was going to bring it up. I would actually classify that one not as an RPG.
That's why I said sort of.
Not. It has a lot of those elements because it is so story driven, but there's no leveling progression that I remember, because it's like you just get different guns and stuff. You have the same abilities essentially,
different items.
But are you inserting yourself as Nathan Drake?
So that's where we get down to it. It's like, is it an RPG because it is so immersive in terms of the story? Because the whole concept of Uncharted was taking your cliche tropey action adventure movie and letting you play it out. You be the one to immerse yourselves and take on the role. That is like the kernel of why it came out. Even though it doesn't have those elements, I can see how that one is.
That's why I said sort of. It was
that one's on the edge for me. But right.
We should make a tier list.
Oh God. We're not getting into tier lists. put that on Patreon. Make people pay for that.
I guess unless anybody has anything else about where you've seen the cultural impact of it, I think we can jump into, because we're already now starting to talk about, we've kind of
Personal
arguably
favorites.
defined what defines an RPG, but what makes a good one, in your opinion?
It's Pokemon.
Pokemon or get the fuck out.
So yeah, just go play Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. Have a good time. No, it's a good game.
No,
Trust me.
never. I know you said it's a good game, but I can't cheat on Pokemon.
Well, when you come up here, you'll
die.
have to try it because I have it, and you can try it without paying for it.
I don't know. That might be sinful. Only Pokemon, the only brand.
I'll turn all the Pokemon games on my shelf the other way so they won't see.
They can't see. All right.
I mean, like for me, what makes a good RPG is a similar answer to what makes a good game. It's about wanting to play in the world and being drawn into the setting and your character and wanting to progress and advance, whatever storyline you're going down in that game. I think that kind of is the definition to me. Do I want to keep going back to it?
Well, and I think on that point, and it's why I like Pokemon so much, is you could complete the story, but then you could immerse yourself in the Pokemon world of just like running around catching Pokemon, battling wild Pokemon, and it takes you, and it's a way to escape reality, and immerse yourself in these games. And a game that may not have the best story but has like good aesthetics, like the Assassin's Creed games, and those are another one that I could just come back to and just run around the world, and it's a way to zone out and kind of escape our terrifying reality at the moment, and just immerse yourself in whatever's going on there, and not have to focus on the story. You could kind of mindlessly play, and for me, that I could just keep coming back to that, and coming back to that character and those that setting, that theme that's there, and just kind of get lost. I think that for me is what makes it like good, and what is the foundations of it.
All right, rare disagreement here then. For me, it is about the story. That is the thing that I can accept frustrations, limitations, whatever on any game, so long as I find the story compelling. It's the narrative for me is what RPGs are about. And that's how I get immersed, is losing track of, say the real world in that sense. And again, it is that immersion, but it is, I immerse myself in the story and what is going on. And that's why when we get to it, we'll give Matt a chance first. It's why Skyrim is not my favorite.
Matt, I want you to get your word out there. I do just want to agree with you, Ben, on that. For me, it's a little less the story and more a nexus of enjoying the gameplay and story together. There's certain RPGs I've played where I really like the story, but I'm not a fan of the gameplay, and that kind of turns me off, and vice versa. So I think there's kind of a middle ground, but Matt, I'll let you take over.
So the way I describe it is that one of the big things, the way I would just discuss how you're talking about story, is that the story needs to make me want to keep playing and make me want to finish and make me not want to put it down.
Right.
Because there are games that I've played, and Skyrim is a really good example, Ben, because I kind of agree with you in the sense that like Skyrim is a game that I can pick up and put down periodically and just like, do a little bit here, do a little bit there, and like just put it down whenever. But there are games that I've played before where I cannot play anything other than that game until I'm done with it, because I just need to keep going. I need to keep getting farther in the story. I need to find this. I need to go get this item. Like a game that pulls me in so much that I can't stop playing it, and the story is that tight, that's a huge bonus for me. But my real big thing with RPGs is because there's so many different ways you can play them, usually, choices. The replayability factor is huge. The ability to go back through again. So for me, like a Dark Souls, and play a completely different play style than how I normally play, or go through and try a challenge run, hitless or magic only, stuff like that. The ability to go through and play a game a different way and then a different way after that and just be able to experience it in multiple facets is probably the best way. Like that's what marks a true RPG for me.
Beating the Elite Four, Shuckle only.
Chuckle muck, toxic stall,
All right. So
or
then,
mushkle.
let's go around the horn and get what is your favorite RPG. I will say you can at most pick three. Try to pick one, but what is your favorite? Who wants to go first?
I'll go last.
Okay.
I need a moment to think.
Rick, you're mute.
I know
Rick,
my
you're
like
muted.
top one.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I didn't want to make you all hear my chewing.
No worries.
So I was saying that for me, I'm gonna categorize it in that. No, actually, my number one Skyrim. That game, I don't know, it sucked me in. I played it towards the beginning of the quarantine of COVID pandemic, and it really just absorbed me for about a month and a half, and I think that's probably my favorite like RPG overall. I mean, then after that, for me, it's GTA and Red Dead kind of at the same level, just because I think those games are more for nostalgia purposes. Like, I don't know, playing Grand Theft Auto back in the day and entering all the cheat codes in to get all the guns is one of the highlights of my gaming life. So I think any list of top RPGs for me, has to include, Grand Theft Auto.
Those were the good old days.
Or Red Dead, whatever you want to pick. Those sandbox games.
I'm gonna have to go with Pokemon Crystal because it was my introduction to the Pokemon world, and that like second generation of Pokemon where you could go from Johto to Kanto, incredible. It's just absolutely.
It's how every
fantastic.
Pokemon
Didn't
game
need a
should have
DLC.
been. You should be able to go to all the
Exactly.
regions.
They should have built on. Yes, I want to go fucking everywhere. So that was incredible. They've never been able to master that again.
Well,
that
no,
was
because
like
why would they do that?
peak
They want to sell you more
Pokemon.
games.
Exactly. So that's my number one. But then I agree with Rick that the sandbox, GTA, Red Dead, definitely my favorites.
No Assassin's Creed?
Well, I was gonna say like now Assassin's Creed, but I think I don't know. My favorite and foundational are definitely those three.
We'll get to foundational because foundational I think we're going to be a little bit more meta about. Because
I'm foundational. For
I
me,
would say
as part of my favorite.
I would say that going off of where we've come down on what is and what isn't an RPG. If we are allowing Uncharted and Assassin's Creed into it, I probably have to put those at my top. Just because
you've played a lot of Assassin's Creed games.
I played a lot of them. They were.
I remember going to your house and just watching you play it and just hanging out in the attic.
I probably put the most in my formative gaming years. I probably put the most in. I was fascinated. I was young enough at the time to be fascinated by the story. In retrospect, I can understand how they were fucking dog shit now.
How it's just the assassins versus the Templars and everything.
And how stupid that is. But like, I love the ancient conspiracy stuff. But again, Uncharted the series was great as well because it was one of the best story games I had played, and that one is such a story driven. It's about the story. It's not really about it's not about exploring. It's not about even the gameplay isn't that particularly expansive beyond maybe some of the stealth stuff and some of the agility stuff, but like you're just shooting guns at guys, but it was about the story
game, really.
I do have something that is more say strictly RPG. I've only now started playing it. I'm really not that far into it, but The Witcher 3 has got to be one of the best games I've ever played.
CD Projekt Red, why can't you do that more often?
Yeah, I know. I don't have much to say about the story yet because I'm not far enough into it. But every other element that we've talked about in terms of RPG, the best I've ever seen it. It is so intricate and interactive. and there's so much to do, but it doesn't really feel overwhelming, and all the quests feel thematically involved. I mean, because that's basically the nature of what a witcher is they get hired to go kill a random monster. It doesn't have to have something to the story. So in that sense, I don't feel like that it distracts me from the game. But I just loved like going around brewing up the right type of like oil for my silver sword in a potion to be able to kill this specter like in like 3 hits. Like I had tried it out beforehand and purposefully pre-saved, knowing that it was probably not going to work. Got owned super fast. Then I just went, made the potion as I was supposed to, and just tooled on this specter in like 30 seconds. It's like, and it didn't feel like, oh, that was a letdown. I felt good and rewarded for putting the effort into it in different ways. So like it's something new to me for what I've experienced in RPGs, but that one has got to be at the top of my list right now.
So you told me to try to cut it down to 3.
Right. Is an impossible task for Matt, we know.
I've done it to 4. Is
Okay.
4 acceptable?
Okay. I'm impressed. Yes.
Okay. My favorite, top tier, gold standard. Little
Your
out of left
lists.
field. Bloodborne. An action RPG.
Okay.
That's my favorite From Software game that I've played. So that's why I'm picking that as my top, because the From Software tier is probably all S tier if we're doing tier ranking for me.
Mm-hmm.
Bloodborne is definitely my favorite. That's definitely the game I can go back to the most and play in different ways. My first playthrough through, I created a god killer of worlds who could just do everything, and he is just a monster. He's a tank. Like the story of that game, they don't hand you the story, they make you find it. But like the hidden story and background of everything going on is just really interesting. I can never say enough good things about that game. It's very difficult. I know that. I know it's hard for people to pick up. It's very fast paced, but that's probably my favorite current memory.
Yeah, that was a very
number
good game.
2. I was torn on this one, but I think I'm going to put God of War there, 2018.
I'm also really enjoying God
Because
of War.
God of War, when I was playing that, was a game that I could not put down. That was a game that I always wanted to find more things. I always wanted to keep going. I always wanted to get more loot. Like that, number 2. Top tier game. It made me feel like a dad.
Yeah, no, that did all of the elements of RPG that we were talking about, even with our disagreements on, like Ben and I with the story versus like the immersion of like the setting. That game does all of that perfectly. Or at least pretty well.
Yes. No, that's as close to perfect as a modern, like more straightforward RPG, I would call it, gets. Because I was torn on that one between that and something like Horizon Zero Dawn, which is a lot more open in the world than God of War, a lot more exploratory. But I had to put God of War's story well above what Horizon Zero Dawn does for a story. Number 3, Final Fantasy, not 7, 12. Final Fantasy 12, the Zodiac Age. I think that is the peak of what Final Fantasy did as far as the combat system is gorgeous. Instead of a turn-based combat system, you create, they call it gambits, and you essentially program your party to do things based on certain actions. And the more you level up your party, the more gambit slots you get. So you can set up like if I fall below 30% health, you heal me. If enemy makes me blind, you remove that buff. Like you program your whole party, and when you get to the nitty gritty, you can program a perfect combat circle so that everyone is never debuffed, never fallen below a certain percentage of health.
Cool.
That's nice. I like that, because like one of the other ones that I've probably sunk over. I've already done over 100 hours into Pathfinder Kingmaker, and I'm probably less than halfway through the actual story. And what I think a reason why the time is so much is that I do turn-based essentially all the time, unless it's a super really simple random encounter where you're just getting attacked by a bunch of wolves or kobolds or something. But like any like real story based encounter that you're having to deal with, I'm almost always going turn based, because when you go to real time, it's like the real time with
Yeah.
pause is what it used to be,
The KOTOR type
exclusively.
system.
Yeah, they do now you say they it was a more recent thing. I mean, I've only ever played it when it had turn based, but it used to just be the real time with pause. And I would always like, I felt like I'm taking so much more damage. My party, that is taking so much more damage than they need to, because I can never make the commands as fast as I need to. It's like I would have to be pausing so much that it's effectively, again, I should just be doing turn based. So that's the trade off, though, is turn based takes so much
Yes.
longer. So I feel like that is a huge reason why I've put so many hours into it, is because I'm exclusively doing
Well,
that.
one of
Because,
the
or else I'm taking a shit ton of damage, and then we've got to waste so many more spells than we need to, and we're not going to be able to do the next encounter that we need to.
One of the nice
like,
things
on
that
this
Final
map.
Fantasy 12 does is that in the Zodiac Age version specifically, they added a fast forward feature. So once you've programmed your party, you can speed up combat a little bit. And then say you start to get down, like you're starting to fall behind a little bit, you can slow it back down and, retake control and a little bit of agency to pick some stuff up, which helps with progressing stuff through quicker. It's one of my favorite Switch games I've played, actually, is Final Fantasy 12 Zodiac Age, and I own it on PC now. But number 4, to wrap it up, I would put Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which might be a hot take amongst JRPG fans. That is wildly considered to be a waifu collection game. I disagree, but I get it. That game is the only game on my Switch with a playtime that even comes close to Breath of the Wild, and it's like 800 hours. I played that game so much.
Wow.
It's not even funny.
What is waifu? I don't know what that means.
The hot
Waifu
anime girl.
is the
yeah.
yes.
It's like
Okay.
Ooh.
Waifu and husbando.
Yeah. All right. So I guess we can then switch into what do we think are the overall foundational RPGs?
Pokemon.
I know I have one. I mean, I think it
D&D.
should be clear. It's Dungeons and Dragons. Like, you have nothing else without D&D.
D&D is the building block that everything was built off of. You can make foundational franchises for like genres, but D&D is where it all starts.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I don't honestly, like, we've talked a lot about it, and I think it's pretty self-evident that in terms of the overall genre, it's like you can't escape it.
Even the traditional JRPGs at the start, they had the D&D classes, like just straight up D&D classes.
Right. Any other final thoughts, though, before we wrap things up?
Much like Final Fantasy, this will never be our final thought.
Right. No, we're thinking this more as like foundational lore for the podcast to build off of. Again, it's that fact that the imprint of RPGs as a genre touches on everything else that we're probably ever going to talk about on this channel, that it was worth going over that, again, that brief history for our own good and for any listeners out there. And speaking of listeners, it is now time for plugs. You can find us streaming weekly at twitch.tv/campaign comrades. You can find
campaign_comrades.
Fuck. I'm going to send them all to some random ass account, and they're going to get all our views. God damn it.
No, they don't exist.
All right. Twitch.tv.
We should just make another account so no one can take that. With that
twitch.tv /campaign_comrades. We stream weekly, both, we do independent streams on our own as well as some group streams. come and check us out. Anything else that anybody else wants to plug here on the space? Oh yeah, follow us on Twitter.
Support us on Patreon, patreon.com/campaign comrades.
Yeah, if you feel the urge, you can say we will hopefully have a real Patreon campaign push sometime in the future, but it's there, it exists. Come give us money, we need it.
You're interested in following my RPG shenanigans, you can find some of that on YouTube, Smokey the Bear Gaming.
There you go. Yeah, we are also on YouTube at Campaign Comrades. All the places you can find us. Come do it. For more discussions like these, gotta subscribe.
Click that bell. Ding 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 ding.
Till next time.
Till next
All
time.
right. Bye bye.
Peace.
Bye.